Hi, everyone, and welcome to another podcast episode. I hope wherever you are safe and peace reigns in your life currently. We are going through mad times, as you no doubtedly know. What's going on in the world right now, with wars everywhere and prices of things flying through the roof. But silver linings, if you are in commodities and you invested in commodities are going sky high right now. So maybe there's a silver lining there, but you just will not be able to go anywhere really because oil is very expensive. Anyway, we have we hopefully sense and sensibility will prevail. This coming month even hopefully. We have Dean and Prash again with us. So welcome, guys. How are both of you doing?
Hello.
Hello.
I I am good. I am good.
Can't complain. Can't complain. How are you, Captain?
I am quite well, actually, quite well. Everything considered,
That's good.
that's happening around us, still quite well. I'm still quite positive. I never really let anything external affect me internally, as we know. Well, yeah.
That's good.
Well, I try to anyway. As best I can. Doesn't always happen. Well, today it's Prash's turn to discuss a particular something. So without yammering on further, I'll let him do the hosting for the rest of the show.
Okay. So you guys been well? The war is on. It's happening. It's real.
Yep.
And as we know that it can affect a lot of
Yep.
people in a lot of different ways, eh? Most people, I think nowadays, most people sort of are phased or not phased by it, and then a lot of people are like they take it very seriously. A lot of people are like trying to support the people in Ukraine. A lot of people are like trying to do things that they can to help. I mean, um, in our lives, I think in South Africa, you pretty much only ever see everything on the news, right? And then the
Yeah.
oil prices go up, right? And then you're like, oh my God, what's going on?
Yeah.
And then petrol is expensive, so you can't go anywhere, like Ash was saying.
Yeah.
But you know, uh, there's a topic that I wanted to bring forward that's a little closer to home on the personal side, for people, right? And it's the topic of or being overwhelmed, right? And it was something that impacted me recently because you know how sometimes you go through life and some of the external things can affect you. Like Yash says, he tries not to let them affect him, but even internal things can impact you, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking a really good discussion would be around uh, when someone is overwhelmed, right? What happens, right? Because when I say overwhelmed, I mean like you can be overwhelmed with joy, but you can be also overwhelmed with like sadness or grief or something like that, right? And I think when you're overwhelmed with joy, I think there's not really much that people really want to help you with because you're not really struggling, you're really very happy. But on the other side of things, when you're overwhelmed in terms of or overwhelmed negatively, to your person or to yourself, the first thing that I would like to discuss around is what do you consider or what do you think of when someone asks you what the meaning of overwhelmed is?
Yeah.
Can I go first?
Sorry, Dean, you want to go first?
Okay. No, you
No,
can
go
carry
for
on.
it. Go for it.
Okay. So thank you. In terms of the definition, I would just say, in the past, from my own personal experience, it's when you just can't cope with everything that's happening. Like you feel a little bit panicked. Your thought process, your mind's like completely racing. You feel
Yeah.
like you don't really know what to do next, and it's all too much, and that's where I suppose the phrase overwhelmed comes in. It's like it's just too much to handle at any given moment.
Yeah. And has it affected you a lot? Does it impact you a lot?
Um, Well, the being overwhelmed or the thing that overwhelms me.
Well, firstly, let's go with being overwhelmed specifically. Does it impact your life a lot? In terms of like what you're doing at the time, and then you feel overwhelmed, or something happens and you feel overwhelmed. What does that do to you?
It shakes me up and says, okay, you need to take a step back. That's kind of just that's the first thing that happens. As soon as I feel overwhelmed, I withdraw a little bit, like mentally from the situation. I can physically still be there, but I have to mentally withdraw and go, okay, I need to take a breather here because this is way too much to handle. And then I look at what I can affect quickly, just to get some kind of
Okay,
points on the board. And that's how I go about
okay.
it. So it definitely impacts me emotionally in that point in time. But I try not to let it continue after that. It's always about just get something done and then break it up into small chunks.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. And yourself, Yash?
Yeah. So I mean, Dean is 100% on point with his definition of overwhelmed. It's an enveloping um, something, right? When something
I like that
just
word.
envelops you and you just feel enclosed by it, unfortunately. And
Like it swallows you up, basically.
that's 100% there.
Yeah.
And there's no escape from it at that point in time. And
Hmm.
more to it,
Okay.
there's also like what you feel physically. So in my history, as I look back, and most recently, I did feel overwhelmed. Um,
Hmm.
like for me, it was a physical feeling. My heart, there were heart palpitations. It was racing. I felt hot flashes. Palms sweaty. I was panicked.
Hmm.
I was, I guess, in a frenzy and feared. And those are some of the things that happened to me when I was overwhelmed. Um,
Okay, so for you, there's like also a major physical aspect that happens, like it hits you both physically and emotionally.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. I mean, remember when I kind of we talked about in the history of this podcast, how do you identify certain states? For me, it's always physical first, right? I know when
Hmm.
I'm not in my centered state, and these physical changes, are indicators that I need to do something about them anyway.
Okay, no, that's actually really good because one of my questions was around how does it actually impact you, and um, from personal experience, and I think also Dean was mentioned it a bit earlier. You can actually feel physically like drained, you know, and like you say, it envelops you, right? So for me, one of the things was, does it give you, or when you're in that state, because I know that you guys have very good coping mechanisms for these things, right? So you guys automatically notice them and step back. Like Dean said, he steps back, or you said you instantly notice it. But when you're feeling that feeling of overwhelm or overwhelmment, is it overwhelmment? But or feeling overwhelmed, right?
Mm.
What gets, is it an emotional feeling that's like overbearing, or is it like grief? Do you feel heavy grief, or is it based on a specific reason as to why you got overwhelmed in the first place?
Um, so with me, it is the reasoning. So it's not just not so much the feelings. The feelings, I'll discuss those just now as well. But it's the reason that put me in that place in the first place, if that makes sense. Um,
It's
yeah,
like a
it was a
trigger,
trigger,
basically.
and then the feelings that happen with it as well. So they don't come in stages; they all happen at the same time. But it's I notice like the reason, and then the things after it. I mean, most recently as well, if I had to chalk it down, um, like I was kind of told something, and then I just, with all of that pressure, all of that weight, overbearing weight, I guess, you can feel a bit, you know, um, inadequate at that moment, I guess, to handle anything. So for me, that was one of the triggers as well. So just, I guess, some news that I heard, or someone telling me something, and things like that.
And Dean?
I think the word inadequate is probably what sums up how I feel at that moment best. So I'm gonna steal Yash's word there. but it's really, it feels like I'm unable to process everything that's happening. Um, like a bad metaphor would be, like when you really stress the life out of your computer and you can hear the fan like laboring away. That's what my brain feels like. It's like I you're asking me to do too many things, and I'm unable. The capacity is not enough. Like this brain cannot do all the things that's happening. And usually that's that you hit that limit, and that's the trigger to go, okay, I can't do all of this, so I need to dial it back. And then it's an immediate confidence building exercise. So, okay, well, what can I affect in the situation right now so that I can gain some momentum and go forward? And I usually try to find something fairly small that I can affect fairly quickly, that at least gives me a little bit of confidence to overcome the inadequacy I'm feeling at that time. But it's a very mental thing for me first. On a physical sense, the the closest thing would be I can feel some form of anxiety coming on, but it's usually a mental thing first, where my brain's just telling me I can't do everything you're asking me to do. This is too much, and that's that. I am literally being engulfed by information and the environment, and that's that mental withdrawal that happens, and then the assessment of what I can affect immediately starts.
Okay, so that's really interesting. It's really interesting that both of you have very different reactions. Very and it's not instantaneous, but one has a very internal reaction, and emotional and mental reaction, and one has like look, I think Yash's will develop mentally, but I think the physical aspect of it, you emote very physically, you know?
Mm.
It's quite interesting that that happens. Yes, you're gonna say something.
Yeah, and just more to what Dean was saying as well, in the mental game, like your mind, remember your mind is always trying to protect you, but
Yeah.
also it's your frenemy in the worst sense of the word, frenemy, right? And so it races a million miles an hour, um, trying to provide you with answers, and some of those answers that it provides you with are quite scary as well. They add more to your anxiety and your fear and your panic-stricken state and your overwhelmedness, um, on top of whatever originally set you on that path in the first place. So in those stages, like your mind is like terrible, like it is like when I was overwhelmed, my mind went to places that it shouldn't have gone to. I should have controlled it better, right? As I always say, to tell my inner voice to shut up, listen to me now. But I just let it race
Okay.
for
So
some reason.
does it sometimes help you to let it race, or like even with Dean? Dean says that he immediately sees it enveloping him or swallowing him up, and then he first instantly starts looking at something to focus on, right? Whereas with you, does letting it race help in a way, or does it actually make things worse, um, as time goes? Does it, or does thinking, or does letting your mind race allow things to develop?
Okay, so I'll let it, to an extent, I'll let it show me possibilities. And then the moment it starts going overboard, I rein in control again. So at that point, I know it's gone too far. My brain has gone too far, with this whole mind, racing to different ideas, different avenues, different like
Scenarios.
roads, whatever. Yeah, different scenarios. Excuse me for lack. Yeah, sorry. And I'll be like, okay, it's time to stop now. The situation isn't actually as dire as you are thinking, brain. So let's calm yourself down and let's work out a solution together here.
Okay, that's really
Shoot,
interesting because
I don't even get that
yeah,
far.
yeah, it's really
Like
interesting how
with
you both
me,
have different tactics. Yeah,
yeah, but
carry
like
on, Dean.
I don't even get that far when it comes to like looking for answers and solutions. Like when I'm feeling myself getting overwhelmed, it's because there's too much information to process. Like I haven't even gotten to the point where I'm now looking for possibilities. It's just like there's too much processing work to be done, and I need to stop trying to process everything. And that's when the withdrawal happens. So my mind is not even racing; it's just struggling to keep up with what's coming at it. That's my overwhelmed experience. Like I don't even get to the stage where Yash is at, where he's already thinking about like possibilities and answers and stuff. I don't even get there. like honestly, I hit that wall where I can't even process all the detail, and it's like, whoa, dial it back.
You have like sensory overload very quickly.
It's a very mental overload. It's like if there's too much information to process, that's when I hit overwhelmed. And well, when I get overwhelmed, should I say, or that state of being overwhelmed, when I hit that, I haven't even gotten to the point where I've started like thinking about possibilities. It's literally just there's just too much information to process and catalog at this point in time, and I can't organize my thoughts. So I need to step back and figure out how I can put at least one step forward and then navigate from there.
Okay. Oh, that's really interesting because it's such a it's so different the way both of you deal with it separately. One person will automatically look at it as a whole situation and then try to put the issue into context and then try and solve it that way. And the other person will literally just stop everything and then focus on one item and then build up again, you know? And it's different forms of mechanisms of controlling the issue,
Hmm.
but if it works
I
for
mean,
both
like
of you
that's the thing. Like you
individually, I
have to
think
find what
it's
works for
very
you.
helpful for people to listen. Yeah, correct. Yeah, and I think that's really important because people out there, some people can take things into context. Some people may be able to deal with one or two things at a time. Some people can only deal with one thing, and then some people may not be able to deal at all. Um,
I'm the one thing at
and
a time
I
guy.
think it's something that's it's yeah. No, look, I think it's important that you have that context and what works for you. I think is probably the best thing. But I think for someone listening, it's very important to understand that you don't have to be a specific way. You can deal with things in your own way that work for you. And what I wanted to get into a little bit more was because Yash brought up the concept of anxiety,
Hmm.
right? And I think there's a bit of a player there. One of my questions was, is being overwhelmed linked to things like depression, anxiety, a big one like burnout or ADHD as an example, or is it its own condition? Like you may not have any of these issues, but you can still be overwhelmed very easily by something that impacts you. And I had a follow-up question, but I wanted to just understand your take. Is it like a symptom, or can it be its own thing?
I mean, I think it's standalone. I remember I used my situation where I was given a piece of information, and then everything just felt like an incredible weight on me personally. So, so I think like that thing was I don't really have pre-existing conditions, for example, that you kind of mentioned.
Yeah. Well, none of the list that I
Well,
mentioned.
none
Yeah.
of the lists that you've mentioned, right? I may have other things. I don't know. I've
Yeah.
gone
Yeah.
for a
Sure.
Rorschach test. I've gone for a Rorschach test, and I'm okay.
Okay. Okay.
But for me, I think it's standalone, and I think anything can trigger it. It's not necessary you have to have X, Y, and Z, and then okay, then you're going to be overwhelmed by something, you know. That's my take on it, at least.
I'd agree with that in the sense that a perfectly healthy person, physically and mentally, can be overwhelmed in a situation that they're not equipped to handle. Um, I think anyone can really be overwhelmed depending on what kind of situation you throw them in. You know, if someone is depressed, on the other hand, that's something they're dealing with, and you could probably get overwhelmed easier because a lot of your energy and mental capacity is going through just helping you get through the day. So it's easier to overwhelm you because a lot of your resources have already been used. Um, Anxiety is something that it's like a thing that happens in the moment. It's not necessarily a constant state. I know some people do have constant anxiety, whereas other people, certain things give them anxiety, and if you kind of get overwhelmed, it can trigger an anxiety attack. So you could be depressed and you can be overwhelmed easier. And because you get overwhelmed easier, that can trigger an anxiety attack and it snowballs very, very quickly.
I mean, it's a compounding of issues then.
Yeah, really, it's the perfect storm to make your life miserable at that particular moment. I think you mentioned ADHD. Just so people understand what ADHD is, it's a neurodiverse condition or neurodivergent condition where people don't produce dopamine in the same way others do. They can't regulate their dopamine production as effectively. So that's why when people say they have ADHD and they can't sit still or they jump from one thing to the next, It's because they're doing a bunch of things trying to create a little bit of dopamine in their head. That's why they do so many different things and they can't focus on one particular thing. Um, I'm not I'm not educated enough to tell you how being overwhelmed would affect a person with ADHD. But that's just so you understand the context of what ADHD is.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. I like the answers because for me, eh, it was always a question of is this a symptom, but also it can be something that happens on its own because sometimes you can and a bit of maybe a breakdown on my side is something that even impacts your own ego can overwhelm you negatively you know so if someone attacks you, right, emotionally, it can overwhelm you quite easily, and I think that's something that the reason why I wanted to create a differentiation was because it's important to understand that when and I think Dean put it very well. It's important to understand that when you have a condition, right, and you understand and you're living with that condition, being overwhelmed is it's a likely symptom, right? And it's something that, and the reason why I raise this is because it's something that one you should also maybe look out for and create a mechanism to control that when it does occur, but also allow things in your life to help you get away from being overwhelmed very easily, right? And it can still happen, but I mean, it helps to try and put in things that like guide you and help you along the way. And I think it's something that I wanted to raise as a dual thing, like because anybody can
I
be
really
overwhelmed at
like
any
what you're
time.
saying.
Yeah,
Basically, you're saying like come up with some sort of emotional and mental safety protocols.
correct. I'm not saying you have to put in mechanisms of control in your whole life, but I'm saying maybe give yourself an avenue to say this is like a safe space for myself, or create a safe space for yourself at any given point that allows you to view the world from a bubble. So at least you protect yourself from. Yeah, I'm not saying you should live as protected, but if someone has a condition, specifically if you have a condition, this can help you in a way um, that may make your life a little bit easier. Um,
I think this is a brilliant idea, honestly,
look, I
because so
don't,
many people don't
yeah,
realize how
look,
susceptible they are to being overwhelmed in the
yeah,
first
look,
place until they
yeah,
get overwhelmed.
yeah, for sure, because it just happens, right? And it's so quick.
Yeah,
Yeah. But I'm not an advocate for putting in control mechanisms for everything and putting yourself in a bubble normally, because I feel that people should feel what they're supposed to feel, right, and what's coming their way.
yeah, makes
But
sense.
I mean, we always say, or like I always kind of say in these podcasts that you need to have some sort of plan. But we're not robots at the end of
correct,
the
yeah,
day.
Hmm.
We don't follow so
yeah,
many rules. The reason why we have emotions proves that we alive, for
yeah, correct.
example.
And it's like
Um,
you said, it's important to have a plan, right? And I'm not an advocate for living in a bubble, but if you have a condition, it's always helpful to to have a way out, like Dean does. When he feels overwhelmed, he focuses on one thing. That's a way out. You know, so you have this fallback mechanism that you can do. It's just important that you don't live in that fallback mechanism. But I mean, I wanted to get to that a bit later. Um, so I think we've discussed how it can impact a person, but when you're overwhelmed, right, or when people are overwhelmed, and I'm sure you've been overwhelmed in the past before you've had your mechanisms of control and things like that. How badly can it impact you? And that was something that I always wanted to know because I've seen in situations where I've been impacted at work when I was overwhelmed at work or when I was even overwhelmed at home or in my life. And I can see that there's varying degrees of being overwhelmed. Some people can be overwhelmed for like 2, 3 days at a time. And I found that most of the time if I'm overwhelmed in a day, it's pretty much like my whole day is just like unsettled completely, right?
Yeah,
And
it throws you off.
it throws you off, and for me sometimes I find that if I get overwhelmed on a specific day, it takes me 1 or 2 days to recover. um Not that I'm struggling from like crazy things or anything, but like the recovery period, just to set yourself mentally back on this original track that you've had, right? And my question around this was, how quickly can you, or how quickly have you found that your mechanisms work in terms of recovery?
You talk about now or previously?
Uh,
Because you asked a
um,
question about
Look,
earlier on in
yeah,
life.
no, sure. I mean, obviously, the reason why I asked the question about before is because it's taken you a time to build these recovery mechanisms, right? And to see
Oh yeah.
how quickly they now allow you to return back to a state of, at least functionality, and that's more my question. I
Mm-hmm.
like over time you've developed this thing, right? And the reason why I'm asking is because I want to give people an idea of um listen, you may be not good at dealing with being overwhelmed now, but if you deal with it well enough and you like with you guys have put in control mechanisms and you've become good at it to a point where you can show other people that you're not downtime, but you can come out of being overwhelmed and then still operate within a reasonably short amount of time, and it's not always doom and gloom. So that's more my question. I
Mm.
want to know, like, do your mechanisms help you very effectively? And do you? I mean, obviously these are your go-to mechanisms, but how well do you find your recovery time generally?
Can I go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Um, okay, so the first thing I want to maybe give to the listeners and you guys is that the way I see being overwhelmed, it's like an emotional and mental injury. Um, so in a similar way, like you sprain your ankle, you can't just immediately get up and start running, right? There has to be a rest period and a recovery period. You can still get up and move. You might need a crutch, but you can still hobble along. Like you can still maintain some sort of forward movement. The main thing is to not just focus on the injury and let it cripple you from movement altogether. Um, that's the metaphor I'm going with. It's a little bit convoluted, but that's what I'm going with. So my coping mechanisms, what they essentially allow me to do is they allow me to maintain movement while being mentally injured or emotionally injured. So I'm not able to move at the speed I normally move, but I'm still able to move. And if I'm like massively overwhelmed, like maybe there's a personal situation that went on, I got very, very overwhelmed. I can still go back to my routine after that incident has happened. So I withdraw, I start doing one thing at a time. That then allows me to continue moving, and then I then use the weekly or the daily routines that I've set up for myself to ground myself and stabilize myself. In terms of executing that routine, it's slow and sometimes feels very tired and like I don't have the energy to do things. Like this past week, there was a lot of family stuff going on, and I got overwhelmed quite a lot, almost every day. Um, and yesterday and today were the first days where I was trying to get myself back into my routine. And the one thing I found incredibly difficult was just trying to exercise. And I did it because I knew that that consistency would benefit me later on. But Lord above was a mission. Like just exercise like how I normally exercise, it was just very tiring. And I'm like, why am I so slow? And why am I so sluggish? And what's going on? And I'm a bit all over the place at the moment. But it's just getting back into the swing of things. So the recovery period, outside in, looks like I'm fine. But on the inside, like I know I'm still a bit slow. I'm not up to speed yet, but I'm still moving. And that's the main thing. That's my big takeaways. Allow yourself to continue moving. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think for me the question was around time, but I think you put it well enough for people to understand that you you
It
it
depends on
take
how
it yeah
overwhelmed you
yeah
are.
yeah it does, and I think it's
Like what
more
level
yeah
of mental
yeah
or emotional injury
yeah
are you
yeah.
carrying?
But it's so important how you said it in terms of, listen, you know what your normal operation is versus when you're
Yeah.
slow, because not everybody understands that, right? Some people only find their normal operation when they're in normal operation. They don't realize they're operating slowly.
Oh yeah, I get you.
Yeah. So for me, that was
Yash?
that was yeah. But yeah, yes.
Yeah, I mean, typically it affects my state negatively, as we've discussed earlier. Um, but usually its main onset is when my mind is idle. Um, when I'm not actively doing anything, then I notice that it's at its peak. For example, like it'll attack me when I'm when I'm at rest. Um, and I'll get all these emotions, I'll get all these mind races and things like that. And for the most part, I'm active or my brain is active and focused on multiple things throughout the day. But that rest period is as I'm winding down for the evening. So around about like 11:30, that time, 11:30 p.m. for example. And the other day was when it happened, and I was like, okay, what is happening? Because my mind is now not focusing on anything, it's not doing anything, I'm just resting in bed. And now, there we go, these overwhelming feelings just like hit me hard. And I'm lying there trying to control my mind and direct it back to sane thoughts. And it took me quite a while, I guess. I think the other day I timed it. It was about 2 hours 45 minutes before I was able to wrestle it back to calmness and say everything will be okay at the end. And here's our way forward, and how are we going to plan to make it okay. And okay,
So
this is how we're
so
going to do it now.
from what I understand, what you're saying is that you actively keep your mind busy because when your mind is when you haven't or when you don't have full control of what's happening in your head, it can affect you at almost any time.
Yeah, but mostly during
So
downtime, right? When my mind's not active or when I'm not actually doing anything, right?
yeah, but I
It's
mean, you've
the
created a
mind's
scenario
salient during that
where
time.
you've created this scenario where you keep your mind busy all the time. So, say for example, if you were on a Sunday and you decided not to do anything of your normal activities, it could actually impact you then as well when you're actually on downtime.
Oh yeah, sure. During the day, yeah, 100%.
Okay,
The thought will come into my mind, or that idea will come into my mind, and these feelings, um, you know, come back to me again, and I'll be like, okay, whoa, let's.
so
But
it's
but
this.
I'm in a more active state during the day, right? I'm not in that restful state where my energy is low now, and I need to recover. I think if it did happen during the day, for example, I'd be able to wrestle control a lot quicker because I have more energy during the day, emotionally and mentally during that day.
And you have stuff that you have to do, so you can allocate a
Yeah.
task just as quickly.
Okay, so distraction. Um,
Well, I wouldn't say a
um,
distraction. I like to deal with things. I like to deal with
Postponement.
things as they come. So I didn't go to sleep like I always say. My sleep time is about 12 every day, and it took me a bit longer to get to sleep that day. Right, about quarter to three was when I actually did go to sleep.
Jeez.
But I did it that way because I didn't want to put it off. Because if I put it off, that means I'm not dealing with something, and I'm letting that latent feelings carry through to the next day, which I don't really want. I don't really want it to affect me that next day. So, which is why I spent the time and wrestled my mind into submission, and then said, okay, we're done now. We're not going to do this again.
okay, so that's also one of the points that I wanted to come out of this. It's so important how I understand that you've done it, right? Because you've basically so when people get overwhelmed, it's something that you have to take a step back from and then try to analyze, right? But what you've done is you've actually let it envelop you and then you've dealt with it from the inside, right?
Yeah.
So it's important for people listening and to understand that I know there's multiple ways to do it, but what happens when you step back and, like Dean does, you focus on one thing and then you focus on the next thing and then you focus on the next thing, versus if you ignore it during the day and then deal with it during the night. It's important to understand that at some point you should still deal with the issue, right? Because it could always come back and overwhelm you, right? So, how do people deal with the issue without being re overwhelmed? How do you bite the elephant into small little pieces so that you can deal with that? Because that's something for me that it might provide a nice playbook for people.
I mean, my mechanisms have always been to look at like you guys are saying is look at the problem and how can we better deal with this right now. Um, there's that saying by, okay, but first I want to just throw this thing out there, that everyone says, really. It's not just linked to one motivational speaker. Um, they always say, if there's a problem, but can you do anything about it? If the answer is yes, then why worry about it? If the answer is no, why worry about it as well? In both cases, if you can and cannot do something, then there's no particular reason that you should be worrying about it, right? But that's problems that you can and cannot do. I guess with dealing with the question that you asked now, sorry about
It's a tough question. It's not easy
No, I mean,
because you can be overwhelmed by so many things, right?
yeah, no, 100%, right? I mean, some things not in your control, some things within your control. But the things within your I'd always say though that we always say that we know we're not supposed to be influenced by external forces. Now, being overwhelmed, that's allowing an external force to kind of affect us, right? It's something that happened in the outside environment that we are now internalizing, and it's putting us in this particular mood and frenzy or whatever. But going back to how to deal with it, it's for me planning. Like, I'm a planning person. I know that, and because I'm a planning person, what works for me and what puts my mind at ease is making sure I have a particular plan and a roadmap in place to kind of deal with it. That gives my mind a solid thing to work toward. Something solid, a stake in the ground to say, okay, Yash has said, this is overwhelming me, but if I can break it down into smaller steps and build a plan around what to do when certain things happen, then I'll be okay. And then this won't overwhelm me again. And that's the conversation I have with my mind when I'm trying to wrestle it over. I'm saying, okay, let's break this down, and here's the plan. And that's it.
Okay, so
that's for me.
Okay, so you break it down and then put mechanisms in place so that the next time it comes, right, you know how to deal with the issue.
Yeah, I pull up this file. Hey, brain, remember I said this is my plan? Please refer to this plan, page 9, section 10, whatever. This is it. So we're okay. That's me in particular. But that's things that you can do some things about, right? And anything that you can't do, that there's nothing you can do, there's no plan you can bold, then that's something that you got to accept and put your mind at ease at. I know it's a difficult thing to say, just say accept, okay, I'm going to accept this now. But if there's nothing you can do about it, then, going back to that philosophy of why worry about it, that don't put yourself in that state.
And yourself, Dean, do you deal with it more or less the same way, or?
Okay, so you guys know how I deal with it in the moment, right? It's to mentally withdraw and then see what I can do immediately. But in cases where you find it's coming back at you later on in the day, like you've gotten yourself out of that immediate situation and, like it's caught you off guard, I have a slightly different, well, not slightly, it's very different actually to what Yash does, where Yash tries to essentially gain mastery or control over his mind. For me, it's more a case of I take the reins off and let the mind run. Like, go wherever you want to go as dark as you like, go as light as you like, just explore the length and breadth of what you might be feeling or thinking, and just kind of wallow in it for a little while, stew in the gravy, to quote you in a previous podcast. But just explore the length and breadth of what that mind is fighting to show me. And it can be very emotionally taxing because you think of a lot of different things, and sometimes those are ridiculous scenarios, unlikely scenarios, heartbreaking scenarios. It can bring you to tears. Yeah, it's very frightening. But the thing about allowing your mind, for me personally, right, and I'm not saying everyone should do this, it's probably a terrible thing to do.
Scary as well,
but
dude.
I'm also a slightly
It's hectic.
crazy person, so for me it works. Is that when you allow the length and breadth of all the things your mind can drum up in terms of possibilities to be laid bare in front of you, and you experience the terror, the fear, the heartbreak, the agony, the suffering, and you experience it in a very short space of time, you understand what you're faced with. Like, these are the possible scenarios that I could be hit with. I can deal with this many. This many are probably going to crush me if they happen, but at least I know this is as bad as it's likely to get. And at that point, I feel like once I'm satisfied, my mind has run as much as I possibly can, and its little legs are tired. That's when the anxiety subsides, and that overwhelming feeling that is coming back at me then also subsides, because I have context for the possible scenarios that it could happen. There's no feeling of, am I not thinking of something? Because again, I mean, the reality is life could throw a situation at you that you haven't thought of, and you're going to be like, oh shit, I didn't think about it, and now you're surprised. But at that point, I'm comfortable thinking that the likeliest scenarios, I know what it could be. It's not going to be that unexpected. It's going to be a variation of one of these things, and I'll deal with that when I deal with that.
Okay. So
I mean, that's your mind. That's your mind once again trying to put you at ease, right? It's building all those scenarios, so it kind of needs to identify how we're going to feel and how we're going to deal. If and when they arise.
Yes,
sort of
it's
thing.
basically just trying to shine a light on the unknown.
It's always it's.
And for
I
me,
mean,
that's a place of comfort.
yeah. I mean, your mind is always trying to do that. Always trying to. I mean, for you, it's a place of comfort. For me, it's terrifying.
well, look, I think Dean's approach is more the devil that you know approach. So he's looking at every possible scenario that can impact him, and then becoming okay with whatever scenarios that are in front of him. And then when you're okay with whatever can happen, then it can't really affect you, right? Because you've become comfortable with the worst, the worst of the worst.
Well, it can't affect you as badly.
Well, yeah, obviously it'll,
It's like Doctor Strange looking at every
correct,
possible outcome.
correct.
Yes.
I
I wish I could calculate 12 million in some change, but I can't. I get to maybe like 40 or 50 and
But
go,
look,
that's
I
enough.
think it's very important that you
Like,
guys
we're happy
both
now.
have. I think it's nice that you both have different ways of dealing with it, because eventually what I'm seeing is that at the end of the day, your ways are very similar, but the way you deal with it is very different. Because the ultimate solution is to come up with uh, uh, this is what I've experienced, and this won't impact me, which is what you've taught yourself, right? Both of you've done the same thing. It's just you've done it in such a way that your own way or your body and your mind is comfortable with. Yash is more comfortable with putting up plans and having a blueprint of how to solve the problem the next time he sees it. Whereas Dean looks at every possible scenario that could happen and then says, look, even the worst one, I'll be impacted, but um, it's better to understand the disappointment before the disappointment comes, right? If you use that analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
executions, but
No,
similar
I think
outcome.
that's very important because people don't deal with things the same way all the time, and I think those two avenues are very strong. Look, there's strong avenues that people could look at in assisting them with being able to deal with being overwhelmed. Another one that I wanted to ask for is, and I think this is more specific to you as a person, but when you feel overwhelmed, sometimes it can be slow and sometimes it can be quick, right? But what is your first or second indicator of when it's occurring? Like you know that it envelops you, you know that it swallows you up, but do you have an understanding, or have you been overwhelmed as many times or enough times to understand that, listen, every time I feel this way, I can see a wall come. The reason why I ask this question before you answer,
Yeah,
yeah,
there's
the reason
enough
why
of
I ask
that.
before you answer is that I like to prepare people as much as they can so that the next time they feel a similar way, they can say, okay, the wall is coming. I can at least open my eyes a little bit more.
Yeah, for me, it is always that insufficient resources feeling. Like I'm unable to process everything that's coming at me, and like you can kind of see it building up in certain scenarios where like things gradually just get more and more and more, and then you hit a wall, like you talked about, where like I'm no longer able to cope with all this information, and sometimes you just step into a scenario and it's just like you get hit with just a ton of information, and it's like, oh god, I don't know what I'm doing, panicking, and now I need to step back. That's it. That's what it is for me.
So you've been overwhelmed enough times to understand that it can affect you that way,
Oh
and you
yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
and you
This is more than enough times.
and yourself, Yash.
Yeah, I mean, I'll so I like to use it's like a snowball. It starts off small, and you can feel it getting bigger, and bigger, right? And then an avalanche happens afterward because then it's that quick, type of onset. But you feel it building up. So it'll be like I said, any external force, any idea that comes into your mind, any scenario that can have a particular trigger or triggers your mind to start from a small snowball, rolling down that hill. And then you'll notice your mind making it bigger and bigger and bigger until it comes full on to the forefront. And then, you're like, oh shit, wait, what just happened? I'm thinking about this consistently now. And it's just, that's all you think about, right? So the identification for me is, okay, so the thought will come into my mind. And as it's getting bigger, I'll notice physiological
Okay,
changes,
fine.
excuse me, in myself. That's the cue to say, oh, whoa, okay, something's happening now, and what is it, and what can I do about it?
Okay, that's I think that's good. I think both of you have it impacts you so differently, but the issue is the same. um like Dean will feel that he's like
Yeah.
with Yash, it's downtime. So when he's not run out of energy, but when he's on a low energy state, which means that he could have high energy for long periods of time, right? But he chooses to go into a low energy state because he needs to go to sleep or he needs to get away from whatever he's doing. And that's when it impacts him. With Dean, it's a different story. With Dean, it's mentally he's running low on resources, right? And that's when it hits him, right? And information overload comes about. And I think it's so different how the external forces impact you based on your current state, right? Because your current state is not a low energy state in both cases, but it's a state of when you aren't high functioning, right? And when you're not high functioning in both cases, um, external forces create this overwhelmment, right? And that's the trigger. And what I'm understanding is that maybe just from both your cases, but not everybody else's cases, is that it's a low energy state or non high functioning state, but an external trigger, right? And
Yeah.
that for me is something that's quite important as a signifier, right? Because I think that people who live natural low energy states or non high functioning states can be impacted very easily by
Definitely
definitely
more
more
susceptible.
susceptible. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that's very important. I'm not saying high functioning as you have to be high functioning. I'm saying your level of high functioning. So each person has a different level of high function, right? And some people's are very high, some people's are low. It's
Yeah.
not about who's better, who's worse, but it seems to be the common underlying issue, right? And to be honest with you, I find it the same way. When I find when I'm on a break or on a holiday or something like that, that's when it'll impact me most. Like when people say you go on holiday and that's when you get sick, right? Um, it's a similar state when you're not high functioning, an external force can actually impact you, and I think that's something that's very important for someone who struggles with being overwhelmed quite a lot to understand about themselves. Because when you label these things, it really does help you deal with it going forward. The next thing that I wanted to look at was what can someone do um, to prepare, like Yash has plans and stuff like that. Are there other ways to do that? Can you do hobbies, or like Yash does routines, or animals, or is it, there's lots of different mechanisms, but do things like hobbies and stuff, do they help? Do they give give positive assistance to overwhelmment?
Okay, so for me, like every situation where I've been overwhelmed thus far was unique, and new to me, right? And so I've had to, whilst the symptoms and stuff were the same, just the situation was different. Um, and I've had to deal with them accordingly. Doing things like you're saying, hobbies and things like that, um, moreover, seem a bit of distractions to me rather than actual attempting to align your mind again, or to put your mind at ease. Is that what you mean, right? To
No,
to
no, no.
try
Yeah,
and
no, definitely. Like say for example, building a puzzle, right?
yeah.
That's a hobby.
I guess that's like if that's your, for example, if that's your way of dealing with it, or approaching the problem or approaching the issue, like you can't have your mind in a random heightened state, right? And then try and solve a problem. It's not going to work. So putting yourself like in your hobby state first, or doing something else, I agree it will help. In my situation, not particularly what I do, but I can see the merits of doing something that you love doing, and then calming your mind down and going back to dealing with the issues.
From my side, I think, look, personally, I could be in a high energy state and still be overwhelmed. It's less likely that I'll get overwhelmed, but if the scenario that causes me to be overwhelmed draws more energy than I have, or draws more resources than I have available, that's when the overwhelming happens. Um, so, I mean, I can be functioning, I can be happy, and I can have lots of energy. But if the thing that causes me to be overwhelmed taxes my resources to the point where it's reached its limit, yes, it's a very big thing at that point, but it can still happen. For me, the in scenario, in situation thing is always to, like I say, withdraw and then do one thing at a time, and that's a confidence building thing, just to get some momentum back. And then the other thing that I do afterwards is, because like you have to recognize that, like I say, it's a mental or emotional injury that you've now taken, so you've got to recover, and part of that is recovering resources that were lost, right? Because you just got taxed heavily to the point where you can't even function properly, and you had to slow down to just doing one thing at a time, or at least I do anyway. So how do you start replenishing, right? And that for me is where routine plays a massive part, because routine provides a way to ground yourself. It provides a sense of stability. It provides a sense of security, and ultimately it provides a sense of confidence. Routine is something that is, you can automate a lot of it, so you're not allocating resources in your routine anymore because you did that up front, and you can just focus on allowing yourself to recover and decompress a little bit. And then the things that I do to sort of replenish, like particularly things like managing your dopamine levels, or your all the good chemicals in your brain. There's stuff that you can do. There's things that like little rewards for yourself. I mean, Yash is really good at this, where he works out how to reward himself for doing something really big. Something I wasn't very good at. Something I'm learning this year. All the stuff I don't like doing, or stuff that has really taxed me. When I need to replenish, I look at my reward schedule, and it can be anything from giving yourself a little chocolate or an ice cream, to going to the movies, to buying an article of clothing, to, like there's different things you can do to make yourself feel better again. And that's what it is. Like, if you need to do something to make yourself feel better within reason, and as long as it's healthy, then I would encourage that. As long as it's not impacting your health or impacting other people, then go for it.
Very good. So I like that both of you have come up with routine, but also reward, which is very important, I think, because you allow, and essentially what you said is makes the most sense. Is you replenish those dopamine levels that you've essentially lost, right? And then you can focus on fixing the issues in front of you, or dealing with the things in front of you. Um, I only really had one more question after this, was how can I set up my life if I'm a person that gets naturally overwhelmed? Um, is it something that I can monitor? Um, it on a not on a daily basis, but on a continual basis. And is there something that I can do within myself to assist me going forward? Like I know Yash he puts in a plan to
Yeah,
deal with the issue
journal.
the next time he sees it. But
Honestly, I
do
think
things like
journaling is the best way
mindfulness
to
and
go. Well,
awareness
not the best one, but it's a
allow the
very good way to go about
control
it.
of
Like you talked
avoidance
about mindful and
of
awareness,
these things
that stuff only comes if you make the
where
effort
possible?
to be mindful and be aware. And documentation is a very successful, tried and trusted way to do that. So, keep a journal. Like today, I felt overwhelmed at work because such and such happened. Try and be conscious of, or make notes on your phone even just to add to it later. Say, look, these things happened in the lead up to that event. This is how I felt during the event. This is what I was unable to do. This is how I felt. And then this is what happened afterwards. And you'll eventually begin to see patterns, right? And once you start seeing those patterns, then you can start putting in some safety measures or safety protocols, safety nets, whatever you want to call them, to say, okay, well, if it's happening, let's just say end of the month where there's reporting, you get overwhelmed during the report session. Okay, well, how do I mitigate getting overwhelmed at that session? Okay, I can be better prepared for it. Or is there something that happens during that session that causes me to be overwhelmed? Like a client asks a question I don't know. Well, then prepare for those types of questions. Write down all the questions that they've asked in the past. What are the potential questions they could ask? I'm getting into a lot of nitty gritty detail here, but essentially, once you identify a pattern, you can start building in procedures to help you navigate those better.
I like that. I really like that concept.
100% agree with
Very
that.
helpful, I think.
Wholeheartedly agree with that. Really, you know, it's more to that as well. It's recognizing that there are patterns and training your brain to recognize those patterns, and then telling it that there's ways out, as Dean mentioned. Being better prepared. Preparedness, being forearmed is forewarned, for example, that saying. Um, so in any situation, I always like to say that there is a way out, regardless of what your brain and its dire sense of contribution says, right? There's always a way out, and you need to just train your brain consistently to see, okay, there's always a way out, and I'm making a mountain out of a molehill sort of thing, right? And I need to obviously bring this down again. So I completely agree with Dean's methods and how to do it.
And even if
Okay.
it is a
Good.
mountain,
I
just
like that.
remember that you climb a mountain one step at a time. So just because there's a mountain there doesn't mean you must give up. It just means you have to find a path.
Or give into your mind, for example, right? I mean, the outcomes of someone who doesn't deal with the overwhelming feelings is they'll be submissive to their mind, and the mind's thoughts thereafter, and the resultant of it, right? Um, so giving into your mind, or the thoughts of your mind from feeling overwhelmed, we're trying to avoid that.
Yeah, like you got to work with your mind. You have to don't just do everything your mind wants to do, but try and understand what your mind is trying to help you get to. And like if you need to be firm with your mind, like in Yasha's case, and then that's what you do. You practice discipline. If you like the way your mind approaches things, like mine, then allow it the room to do what it needs to and respect what it's trying to show you. But then you also have to be prepared for whatever shitstorm it throws your way. But work with it. Like go into that knowing, like, okay, you're not doing this to screw me over. You're running wild because you're trying to understand limits. And that's why I'm letting you run wild, because I also want to know the limits. And then go into it that way. Like work with your mind. Don't let it control you. So either way, just never be a slave to your thoughts.
Okay. That's really good, guys. I like the fact that you both, even though you have different approaches, I like the way the the preparedness avenue that you both agreed on. I think it's very important for people who, not everybody journals, to be honest with you. Most people don't actually, but I think the idea of having,
It's so
yeah,
underrated.
look, I think the idea of having a way of recording the things that have happened to you so that you can learn the triggers and learn the things that impact you is quite a really good way of looking at it. Did
There's
you
an
guys?
app for that. Honestly, there's an app for it.
There's always
Yeah,
an app for it.
There's an app. I mean, just search in the app store for particular ones. Like the one that I use every day is called Day One. Um, Day One, and I use it as a journaling app every single day. I'm able to tag like places, time. I can add photos and whatever. So it's an app called Day One. That's the one I use. I mean, you don't have to use it. There are many others on the market.
No, but I mean, that's a
Yeah.
start, right?
Yeah.
I quite like the sensory experience of like I like the sound and the feel of writing, and as I write, I find that it refreshes quite nicely in my mind. I can understand and remember what happens. If I don't have access to that, then I'll make a note on my phone, like very low tech in that sense. I'm just pulling out the notes app and I'm typing or leaving a voice note. Voice notes are wonderful, by the way. Like you can literally just put down your thoughts in a voice note, and then you go home later and you document them in your diary. Um, but honestly, whether you journal on a device or on a piece of paper, it's just the biggest cheat code to finding stability and mitigating risk.
So Anthony Robbins throws out a stat, and he says, the written word is remembered over 85% more than just listening to something or just the spoken word sort of thing. So journaling will imprint it in your mind, and you'll be able to recall it better if you just think of something and just don't write it down or journal it, sort of thing, right?
There's different parts of your brain that's active.
We are trying to imprint it in your mind so that the next time, it's better equipped, to deal with things.
That's actually really important.
Yes.
I think that point you guys have raised is very, very. It can be very helpful to people that don't have a way out at all times, and I think it's a step forward that I think people should actively look at using if they feel overwhelmed quite a lot and all the time. I think it can also help with things like anxiety, um, and stuff like that because it also provides the same sort of avenue as looking at what causes the anxiousness, um, and things like that. So I think it's actually a very important point that you guys have raised. Thank you. Um, did you have anything else that you wanted to add? Because I did do a little bit of research on being overwhelmed and things like that, and I found one or two um, words that you can use as a quick way to assist you. So
Yeah, share it.
one of them was called stop, right? And like Dean does, it's basically the letters. So the first thing is to actually stop, which is the S. Pause what you're doing, right? Then the T says take a slow and deep breath, right? O is observe your thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations, right? So you actually observe without reacting, right? And then the P, which is proceed to focus on one thing at a time, right? And I think that's exactly how Dean does it, right? So
Hey,
That's
so
exactly how
Dean,
Deetan's feeling.
you've either read this or you've learned this lesson on your
no,
own.
it's years of trauma.
Well, look, you've developed you use something that people have developed, or you've learned something without people showing you how to do it, right? And which is really cool actually, because it proves that it works, right?
Good to know.
And then the other one was called Rain, right? Similar concept. So recognize what's going on, which is the R. Then allow the experience to be there just as it is, which I think this is sort of a bit of Yash's take on it. Then I, which is the investigate with kindness. So you actually look at the avenue. So Dean sort of also does this, but he sort of just lets it run wild, whereas Yash investigates it and then tries to create a plan. And then Yash creates a natural awareness, which is the N, which comes from not identifying with the experience specifically, but taking a step back and dealing with the whole scenario as it is. So both of these words is actually different ways in which both of you deal with the same scenario, right? But in your own way, but it's linked so well with these two different what do you call these words, like but
Processes.
is there, yeah, like processes, right? But it's so cool that the ones that I found are basically the two different ways that you guys deal with these two scenarios, which is actually really cool, and it works quite well.
We should
Magic.
become motivational
I
speakers.
Sometimes-
Put it
actually
out there.
so
We should charge for this
Yeah.
shit.
to be honest, actually a few people have told me that already. that I should be. They've listened to our podcast and they said
Motivational.
It's coming.
and they
It's
said you
coming.
guys should like go on a tour.
Ooh, a Three Wise Potatoes tour.
You guys or you, Yash? Just you.
So when I talked to them, they told me that, and then I gave them the podcast to listen to, and they said we should go on a tour. All three of us should go on a tour. But anyway,
We go tour to Durban and come back. 1 round shot. um, yeah. Look, there's a lot of other stuff that I was looking at as well. I mean, there's a few other things that people say. You know, life has always got this way of testing a person's will, right? Either by having nothing happening or everything happening at the same time,
at the same
right?
time, yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
sort of your
Dude,
your
yeah,
understatement for overwhelming, right? And then a burnout, which is something that was very I thought was very linked, right? Because it's so easy for you to get overwhelmed when when you just completely burnt out. And there's a lot of things on the internet that you can find to help you with dealing with being overwhelmed. But I think the two that we've shared today and the way you guys have explained the way you deal with it is it's so linked, but it's so well practiced that I think other people can use it very simply to help them. And the only other thing that I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add.
Not really from my side.
I mean, okay, so there's overwhelmed with negative, and there's overwhelmed with positive. Like I never understood how you can be overwhelmed with positive. Like you know when someone says I am overwhelmed with happiness, that particular saying, I've never understood that. I don't know if you guys have any take on that. Like what is being overwhelmed with positivity, and is it even a thing really?
Dean, you want to go first?
Have you ever experienced overwhelmed with happiness?
I have as well. Came in like the first real experience I could say I had was a former relationship, where a partner told me how she perceived me, and the fact that she could see all the things that I thought other people couldn't, and the depth at which she appreciates it. That was a lot to take. I was like, good lord, okay, don't know how to process this. Lots happening, and
So is it the same? Is it the same as when you're negatively impacted?
no, because there I'm like the feeling. There's a feeling of inadequacy, right? That's what's driving that. In this particular instance, it was a feeling of joy, but I was simply not ready for this. It was like, wow, okay, I didn't know someone could see me that way,
But did you
or
have
could
a
see
burst of
all of it. Pardon?
did you have a burst of energy?
It was not a burst of energy, actually. I was kind of emotionally tired afterwards, but happy. But like a happy tired, if that makes sense. You know, like you're satisfied, like after a hectic workout, that kind of feeling. Like you're tired.
I was gonna interject
Yeah,
and say after like a heavy piece of cake or something. I don't know. You went to
Well,
work
for
out.
Dean, it's cheesecake, right?
yeah, well,
Yeah, Dean and his
yeah,
cheesecake.
it is cheesecake. But I mean, that's what it was. I was tired because it still required a lot of resources to process this. But I wasn't upset about it. I was very happy. I was very content. I was in a very good space, very positive space afterwards.
That's actually it's very apt. Um, I've personally found that when I'm negatively overwhelmed, I'm very sapped of energy. When I'm positively overwhelmed, I'm very um, I'm lifted with energy. Yeah, it's an abundant form of energy. I think because when I'm overwhelmed, it's not a it's I think Dean and I operate differently where he gets overloaded with like information. For me, it's more of an emotional state. So when I'm positively overwhelmed, and I get positively overwhelmed quite a lot, but I also I don't get as negatively overwhelmed all the time. But when I do, it's very draining, right? So it for me
Mm.
it's more emotional. So if I get very drained when I'm negatively overwhelmed, then there's a recovery period, right? Whereas when I'm positively overwhelmed, I can hold that positivity for quite some time, right? And it actually feeds me, right? So I've learned, or I've tried to learn to live my life on a balance where negative. It's like I don't know if you've done those experiments where you see amplitude and waves, right? So when an amplitude and a wave, for me, any small positive amplitude, I can extend the amplitude and actually hold that positivity. But with negative emotions or being overwhelmed negatively, it's
That's pretty
very
cool.
hard for me to. I find it very difficult to control it. But when I can control it, I don't feel the negativity as much as I feel the positivity, right? Because I focus on the positivity a lot more than when something negative happens. I focus less on the negativity, which means I reduce the amplitude of its impact on me, right? And one of the things that I didn't ask you about that I generally try to use when I'm negatively overwhelmed is music, right? Because like I said with hobbies, there's a different way of there's I found that things like music very strongly impact my sense of emotion. So if I'm feeling very negative, I'll put on music that I attribute to positive music. And there's lots of different genres, but there's different genres for what I'm feeling, right? So some will be voice music, some will be acoustic music, some will be uh, trance music, for example. But I find that different levels of music impact my emotions differently, but it's because of the way overwhelming impacts me. It impacts me emotionally. So by changing my state, by using things like music, using things like a show that I'd want to watch, or like you guys use rewards, these are ways of impacting my emotional state, which strengthen the positivity and reduce the negativity, which is what I focus on and what helps me. Um, but it's different for everybody, like you guys say, and um, everybody should use what benefits them or try to find what benefits them and assists them in the controlling of their overwhelmment. I still can't get that word right. Um, overwhelmedness, is that a word? Okay. But yeah, I think I definitely have gained quite a lot of insight because I think I deal with it differently in a way that you deal with differently, Ash, and then Dean deals with it. Dean, you deal with it differently as well. So it's so different how these being overwhelmed can impact you, and also how everybody has different control mechanisms and different ways of getting themselves out of things and pushing themselves into the right space, which I think each person should try to find their own um, and work on that. But things like journaling and stuff definitely can help you. I don't know if there's anything else, but I wanted to leave the chat with something that I read and something that I have. Um, but it's basically never forget how far you've come, everything you've gotten through, right? And all the times you've actually pushed on, even when you felt like you couldn't. All the mornings you got out of bed and how hard it was. All the times you could never get up, but you still got through another day. And never forget how much strength you have developed along the way, because that will always allow you to push yourself further. And remembering things also allows to put your current state into context.
I actually
I like
So
do,
yeah,
that.
and I think that's like a perfect note to kind of cap the discussion off, in a sense of gratitude and gratefulness.
it's so important to remember that context because it'll help you, especially when you're
Gives
feeling
you
like
confidence.
everything's on top of you, right? No. Yeah, confidence, exactly. But yeah, I think that's pretty much more or less what I wanted to
Thank
cover
you for the
today.
topic.
So thanks, guys.
It's
And
pretty good.
thank you, listeners, for tuning in once again. We appreciate you and love you so much. We hope you got something out of this today. And please let us know what your coping mechanisms are in the poll that I will put up later when this cast is out. And we'll review them and have a look at the next cast. Thank you so much, and join us next time on the Three Wise Potatoes.